The vote to ban a single warship passed in under 9 minutes, and not one of the 1,100 delegates who raised a hand had ever seen the ship they were outlawing. That detail should have stopped them. It did not. The concord of settled stars met inside a hollowed moon called Threshold, a chamber so old its stone remembered 3 extinctions, and on the day of the vote, the chamber was fuller than it had been in 4,000 years. Species that had warred for centuries sat shoulder to shoulder. Trade rivals shared water. A war that had killed 2 billion souls in the outer lanes had paused, just paused, so both sides could agree on one thing. The thing they agreed on was that the human ship had to be erased from the record of permitted vessels, not destroyed. They were not foolish enough to vote for that. Erased. Made illegal to build, illegal to crew, illegal to name aloud in a registered port. A ship that could not legally exist, they reasoned, was a ship that would eventually stop existing. Speaker Orun of the Vel Assembly read the ban into law, with 3 of his 4 hands trembling. He was a careful creature, gray and slow, and he had spent his whole life believing that law was the strongest force in the galaxy, stronger than fleets, stronger than fear. He believed that if every civilized world simply agreed that something was forbidden, the forbidden thing would lose its power, the way a fire loses its heat when you stop feeding it air. He had never met the ship called the Callaway. He did not know that the Callaway was, at that exact moment, drifting silent and dark in a debris field 9 jumps from Threshold, wearing the bones of an enemy. He did not know that the humans had stopped calling her a warship years ago. They called her a hull, just a hull, as if the most feared object in settled space were no more than an empty shell. That was the first thing the galaxy got wrong, and it would not be the last. To understand why 1,000 worlds voted to ban one ship, the listener must understand what the Callaway had already done, and to understand that, the listener must go back to a smaller, dirtier moment in a place no delegate would ever visit, a salvage yard on the edge of human space. A woman named Pel Andrade, who fixed broken things for a living, standing inside a captured enemy warship with a wrench in her hand and rust under her nails, looking up at a wall of armor that her own people did not build. Pel Andrade was not a soldier. She wanted that understood from the start, by anyone who later asked. She was an engineer, the kind who worked with her hands and not her rank, and the day everything began she was 41 years old, tired in her shoulders, and angry about a part that would not seat correctly no matter how she turned it. The ship she stood inside had a name once, in a language full of clicks and pressure tones. The species who built it called themselves the Hetmark. They were old, the Hetmark, older than the Concorde itself, and they were patient in a way that frightened other species more than violence would have. They did not raid, they did not boast, they waited. They had been waiting by their own records for 11,000 years, building towards something they never explained, and 3 years before Pel put her wrench to that stubborn part, the Hetmark had decided that humanity was a variable they no longer wished to allow. So they came, quietly, the way they did everything. They took a human border station called Lowmore, and they did not destroy it. They cataloged it. They counted every soul aboard, recorded the count, and switched the life support off, one section at a time, on a schedule, the way a patient creature trims a garden. 4,106 people. The Hetmarks logged the number and moved on, because to them it was simply housekeeping, removal of an unpermitted growth. They expected nothing in return. That was their oldest mistake, and they had been making it for 11,000 years without consequence. The humans did not have a fleet that could match the Hetmark. Everyone knew that. The Hetmarch had hulls the size of small moons, ships grown rather than built, armored in a black ceramic that ate energy weapons and laughed at kinetics. A single Hetmarch warbarge had once held off a combined Concorde squadron for 2 years and then left of its own accord, unbothered, its purpose elsewhere. Against that, humanity had patchwork cruisers and a stubbornness that other species found genuinely confusing. What humanity did have was Pel Andrade and 400 people like her, and a Hetmark warbarge that had drifted, crippled, into a human debris field after a deep space accident the Hetmarks never explained. The Hetmarks wrote it off. One barge, lost. They had thousands. They did not come back for it. Why would they? It was scrap now, and the Hetmarks did not waste patience on scrap. The humans towed it home in pieces, reassembled it in the dark, and started learning. That was where the band truly began. Not in the chamber on threshold. Here, in a cold yard, with a tired woman cursing at a part that would not seat, standing inside the body of the very thing that had counted her cousins and switched off their air. "It's fighting me," Pell said, to no one. Her voice echoed in the vast hold. The Hetmarks built their interiors too large, too quiet, like cathedrals meant to make a visitor feel small. Pell did not feel small. She felt insulted. Her foreman, a square old man named Dunmore, leaned in the hatchway with a cup of something hot. "The whole ship fights you," he said. "It doesn't want our hands in it. The Hetmarks grew it to hate strangers. Then it can learn to live with disappointment," Pell said, and drove the part home with the flat of her palm until something in the alien wall clicked and held. A light came on. Deep in the ship, far down, a system that had been dead for 2 years woke up and began, very slowly, to think. Pell did not know it yet, but that small stubborn click was the moment the galaxy's clock started running. 3 years later, 1,100 delegates would vote to ban what that click became, and they would do it with trembling hands, and it would not save a single one of them from having to learn the thing Pell already knew. The ship could be taken, the ship could be turned, and once a human had her hands inside it, the ship belonged to the human, no matter whose language was written on the walls. They renamed the captured hull the Callaway, after the yard's oldest welder, a woman who had died 3 weeks into the rebuild without ever seeing it fly. Nobody made a speech. They just painted the name on the inside of the airlock, in plain human letters over the alien script, and got back to work. The Hetmark, 11,000 years patient, had no name yet for what was being built in the dark with their own bones. They would learn one. The whole galaxy would learn it. And by the time they did, learning it would already be against the law. The first time the Callaway killed a Hetmark ship, it did so without firing a shot, and that was the detail that started the fear. It happened 8 months after the click in the hold. The Hetmarks sent a single retrieval barge to the human debris field, not because they cared about the lost hull, but because their records showed it as unaccounted, and the Hetmarks hated an open entry in a ledger more than they hated an enemy. They came to close the line. They came to mark the barge destroyed, confirm it with their own sensors, and update the file. What they found, drifting where the wreck should have been, was the wreck, or what looked like the wreck. Dark, dead, tumbling slowly, exactly as a crippled barge should tumble. The retrieval crew logged it, satisfied. They moved in close to confirm the kill and clean up the entry. Inside that dark and dead-looking hull, Pell Andrade was sitting in a Hetmarch command chair built for a body she did not have, watching the enemy ship grow huge in a window she had cleaned with her own sleeve, and she was not afraid. She was concentrating. She had spent 8 months learning what every panel did, what every grown conduit carried, where the Hetmarch had hidden the systems they did not want a captured crew to find. She had learned the ship the way you learn a difficult person, slowly, by being patient back at it. She keyed a sequence the Hetmarks themselves had built, a docking clamp protocol meant to seize a friendly hull for repair. The Callaway extended 4 enormous grown clamps and took hold of the retrieval barge the way the barge had expected the dead wreck to be inert. The retrieval crew had no time to understand. The Callaway used their own clamp protocol against them, locked on, and then did the one thing the Hetmarch never planned for in any of their 11,000 years. It pulled them inside. The Callaway folded the smaller barge into its own grown structure, hull merging with hull along the seams the Hetmarch had designed for self-repair, and the retrieval crew of 19 Hetmarch found themselves swallowed into a body that was no longer theirs, in corridors that no longer answered them, breathing air that a human had decided they could keep, for now, while she had questions. Pell did not gloat. She was not built for it. She walked down to the seam where the 2 ships had become one, looked at the 19 Hetmarch backed against a grown wall and said, "You counted 4,006 people at Lowmore. I read the log. You wrote it like a grocery list. The Het March did not answer. They were patient. They believed the humans would tire, would make errors, would eventually be removed like all unpermitted things. You're going to help me understand this ship, Pell said, or you're going to sit in here while I understand it without you. Either way, I'm going to understand it. I've got time too. You taught me that. She turned and walked back up the swallowed barge's spine, and behind her the 19 Het March began, for the first time in their species' long memory, to feel the specific discomfort of being inside a thing that thinks faster than you, and is angrier than you, and is not going anywhere. The Callaway did not report the swallowing to anyone. The humans kept it quiet on purpose. A crippled barge that went missing during retrieval was a small loss the Het March would not investigate for years, because the Het March did not hurry, so the humans took those years. They studied the swallowed barge. They learned how the Het March grew their hulls, how the black ceramic ate energy, how the patient ships repaired themselves from the inside, and every lesson they learned, they fed back into the Callaway, until the captured war barge was no longer a Het March ship that humans had stolen. It was a human ship wearing Het March armor, and the difference was the whole story. The galaxy learned about the Callaway the way you learn about a leak, slowly, then all at once, and always too late to stop it. A Concord survey vessel, neutral and curious, picked up a Het March distress beacon at the edge of the outer lanes and went to investigate, expecting a derelict. What it found was a Het March picket squadron, 6 war barges, that had cornered a single human-marked hull and opened fire. The survey vessel started recording, because a Concord ship recording a Het March attack on a third party was valuable evidence, the kind of thing that won arguments in the chamber on Threshold. The recording is still classified in 40 systems. Copies of it have started wars in 3. The reason is simple. The recording shows 6 Het March war barges, the most feared hulls in settled space, pouring fire into one human ship. And the recording shows the human ship taking that fire on armor the Het March themselves had grown, armor that ate the Het March's own weapons because it was built to, and not slowing down. The Callaway did not fire back at first. That was what unsettled the survey crew most. For 90 seconds the human ship simply absorbed the assault of 6 war barges and kept closing, and the survey sensors could not understand why the human hull was not dying. The answer, which no one outside the yard knew yet, was that the Het March had spent 11,000 years perfecting armor against everyone's weapons but their own, and the Callaway was now wearing that armor and being shot at by the only weapons it was specifically built to defeat. Then the Callaway reached the first war barge, and it did not destroy it. It boarded it. The groan clamps came out, the self-repair seams opened, and the human ship took hold of the Het March war barge the way it had taken the retrieval crew, and began to pull it in. The Het March squadron broke formation. Not out of fear, they would insist later, out of correction. They had encountered an undocumented behavior and were withdrawing to update their assessment. But the survey recording shows it plainly, and the chamber on Threshold would replay it 11 times, and every species in that room would recognize the same thing in the way those war barges scattered. And they had seen it in their own kind. They had felt it themselves, in old wars, on bad days. They had seen prey run, and they had never once thought the Het March could be the ones running. The Callaway swallowed one war barge and let the others go. It always let some go. The humans had learned that the Het March's worst fear was not death, but an incomplete file, an open entry, an account that would not close. So the Callaway made sure the account never closed. It took one of every group it met and let the rest carry the story home, and the story they carried was the worst thing a patient species can be handed. The Callaway taught the Het March to wait, and to dread, and to not know when. Before the chamber on Threshold ever heard the name Callaway, there was a second demonstration, quieter than the first, that the Concord spent 2 years pretending it had not seen. It happened at a Concord listening post called Gallowmere, a small neutral station that watched the outer lanes and reported on everyone, humans and Het March alike. Gallowmere was not a fighting station. It was a set of ears, run by a thin, nervous species called the Set, who survived by being too useful to attack and too harmless to fear. The set heard everything that crossed the lanes, and they sold what they heard, and they had grown comfortable in their smallness, the way the Concorde had grown comfortable in the Hetmarch being the floor. The Hetmark came to Gallowmere the way they came to everything, on a schedule, because the listening post had heard too much. The set had picked up fragments of the human transmissions, the first whispers of a captured barge that did not stay captured, and the Hetmarch did not allow a thing like that to circulate. They sent 3 warbarges to catalog Gallowmere, to count the set aboard, and to switch the station off, section by section, the way they had switched off Lowmore. It was housekeeping. It was the trimming of a growth that had heard something it should not have. The set begged the Concorde for help. The chamber on threshold deliberated for 11 hours, which was 11 hours longer than the set had, and decided that intervening against the Hetmarch over a listening post was not worth the risk. The Hetmarch were the floor. You did not challenge the floor over a station full of nervous ears. So the Concorde did nothing, and the 3 Hetmarch warbarges arrived at Gallowmere, and the set aboard, 1,140 of them, began counting the hours until their air was scheduled to stop. The Callaway arrived first. No one had asked it to. The humans owed the set nothing. But a salvage yard had been listening too, on the same fragile band the set used to scream for help, and Pel Andrade had heard a small harmless people being switched off section by section while 1,000 worlds deliberated, and she had recognized the shape of it, because it was the shape of Lowmore, and she did not deliberate. She pointed the ship. The 3 Hetmarch warbarges at Gallowmere had time to register 1 undocumented contact before the Callaway was among them. The set aboard the station, watching through their many ears, recorded the whole thing and later sold it to no one, because they decided some things should not be a commodity. What their recording showed was a single human-marked hull arriving at a station it had no reason to defend, taking the fire of 3 warbarges on armor that ate the fire, and then doing the thing that no one in settled space had a category for. It did not destroy the warbarges that had come to kill the harmless. It took them. It folded them into itself, crews and all, and it left the listening post untouched. Every one of the 1,140 set, still breathing, still counting, but now counting up instead of down. The Callaway did not hail the set. It did not ask for thanks or payment or alliance. It simply made sure the air stayed on, and then it turned and left, dragging the bones of 3 warbarges, and the set watched it go and understood that the floor of settled space had a crack in it that no one in the chamber on threshold wanted to name. The set named it anyway, privately, among themselves, in the nervous, careful way of a small people who survive by knowing things. They began to call the human ship the Open Hand, because it had come for them with nothing owed and asked for nothing back, and a hand that opens for the harmless was, to the set, a stranger and more frightening thing than any fist. A fist they understood. The Hetmarch were a fist. The whole galaxy was organized around fists. But a power that strong, choosing to be an open hand, broke a rule the set had built their entire fragile existence around, the rule that strength always closes, always takes, always wants. The Callaway did not want, and a strength that does not want is a strength you cannot bargain with, cannot predict, cannot survive by being useful to. It was the most unsettling thing the set had ever recorded, and they had recorded everything. The Concorde, when fragments of Gallowmere reached the chamber, chose not to understand it. It was easier to file the human ship as a threat than to sit with the question of why the threat had saved a station the Concorde itself had abandoned. A threat could be banned. A mercy could not be filed at all. So the chamber buried Gallowmere in its records and waited for the human ship to do something it could safely fear, and the human ship obliged, eventually, by being too strong to ignore, which was the only crime the Concorde knew how to prosecute. But the set never forgot, and years later, when the ban was read into law and 1,000 worlds raised their hands to forbid the open hand, the set delegation alone abstained. They did not vote against the ban. They were too small and too frightened for that. But they would not raise a hand against the ship that had let them count upward, and their abstention was the only honest thing in the chamber that day. And Speaker Orun, watching the small nervous creatures keep their hands in their laps, felt the first cold seed of the doubt that would later send him 9 jumps through the dark to find a tired woman under a barge. He did not know yet why the set abstained. He would learn. Everyone who came close to the Callaway learned the same thing in the same order. First they feared its strength, then they feared its mercy. And finally, too late, they understood that the two were the same thing, and that they had banned the only power in settled space that had ever proven it could be trusted not to use itself. Pel Andrade never wanted any of that. She wanted to be clear about this part. Later, when the chamber sent for her, she had wanted to take their cousin's killers apart and understand them, the way you understand a flood so it never drowns your town again. She had not wanted to become a thing that empires voted to ban. But the galaxy does not ask an engineer what she wanted. It only measures what she built. And what Pel built kept growing. The swallowed barges were not wasted. Each one the Callaway took in was studied, stripped, and folded into the human hull, and with each one the Callaway grew larger and stranger and harder to classify. It was not one ship anymore. It was a ship made of every ship it had defeated, a moving record of the Hetmark's losses written in their own grown ceramic, and that more than any weapon was what terrified the Concorde. A human warship that ate its enemies and wore them was a thing their laws had no word for. Their entire body of war law assumed that ships were destroyed. Wreckage could be counted. Dead could be mourned. Treaties could be signed over graves. But the Callaway did not leave graves. It left absences. And absences cannot be filed. Speaker Orun of the Vel Assembly was the first delegate to say the word that would later become law. He said it in a closed session after the 11th replay of the survey recording, when the chamber had gone very quiet. He was an old creature, and he chose his words the way Pel chose her tools, carefully, for the job. It cannot be allowed, he said. A younger delegate, sharp and impatient, from a species called the Koran, asked the obvious thing. Allowed? It is allowed or not by no power in this room. It is a human ship doing human things to the Hetmark, who counted 4,000 of their people like seeds. Why is our hand on this at all? Orun turned all 4 of his eyes toward the younger delegate, and he said the thing that the whole rest of the story turns on, the thing that explains why a galaxy bans a ship instead of building one. Because today it wears Hetmarch armor and swallows Hetmarch ships, and we are glad. And we are glad because we have always feared the Hetmark, and it is sweet to watch the patient ones learn to be afraid. But a thing that can take the strongest hull in settled space and turn it into more of itself does not stop at the Hetmarch. It stops nowhere. It is a key that opens every lock, and right now it happens to be opening a lock we wanted opened. That is luck. That is not safety. The day comes when the human turns that key on a lock of ours, and on that day we will wish we had voted while our hands were still our own. The chamber was silent. The Koran delegate had no answer, because there was none. Orun was right, and everyone knew it. A weapon that grows by winning has no natural enemy, no ceiling, no point at which it has had enough. The only way to stop a thing that gets stronger every time it is attacked is to make it illegal to attack, illegal to acknowledge, illegal to be near, and hope that 1,000 worlds agreeing in unison can do what no fleet had managed. It did not name the Callaway, because to name a forbidden thing is to admit it exists, and the Concorde's lawyers were too clever for that. Instead, it banned a category. It outlawed any vessel that incorporated the hull, systems, or grown structure of another sovereign species into its own body. It outlawed assimilating hulls. It outlawed the very behavior that made the Callaway what it was, and it did so in language so broad that, read plainly, it banned the future the humans were building one swallowed barge at a time. The humans were not invited to the vote. That was the part that came back to bite the chamber hardest. A ban on a human ship, passed without a single human voice in the room, by a body humanity had never joined. The Concorde told itself this was legal, that the law of settled space applied to all who flew through it, that the humans would simply have to comply like everyone else. They sent the ban to the human worlds by the fastest courier in the fleet, sealed with the marks of 1,100 delegates, expecting the response that every other species gave when the Concord spoke in unison. They expected fear, or argument, or at worst, a long and tiresome negotiation. What they got back was a single line, transmitted in plain Concord trade speak so there could be no mistranslation, from the human worlds to the chamber on threshold, and it was not signed by any government. It was signed by a salvage yard. We didn't build it to break your laws. We built it because you wouldn't help us when they switched off Lowmore. Ban whatever you like. The Callaway isn't ours to ground. It's already out there, and it isn't done. The vote itself deserves to be told in full, because the galaxy has since dressed it up as a moment of grave wisdom, and it was nothing of the kind. It was 9 minutes of fear wearing the costume of law. The chamber on threshold filled the way chambers fill when everyone is frightened and no one will say so. The delegates came early. They sat too straight. They spoke in the low, careful voices of creatures who have already decided and only want the deciding to be over. 1,100 of them, from species that had hated each other across borders and centuries, and for one day they were united, and the thing that united them was not love or treaty or common cause. It was that each of them had watched the survey recording, and each of them had felt the same small private collapse, the falling away of a thing they had believed their whole lives without ever examining it, the belief that strength was safe, the belief that if you were powerful enough, nothing could reach you. The Callaway had reached the het mark, the most powerful thing any of them had ever known, and so the Callaway had reached in a way none of them could name, each of them. A delegate from the Corin, sharp and young, tried to say it plainly. The Corin had no love for the het mark. Few did. The young delegate stood and asked the chamber the only honest question of the day. Why, the Corin asked, are we banning the ship that is beating the thing we have all feared for 4,000 years? The Hetmark switched off our stations. The Hetmarch counted our people like seeds. The Hetmark are the reason half the species in this room learned to be afraid. And now a human ship is unmaking them, and instead of thanking the humans, instead of building 10 more like it, we are voting to forbid it. Explain that to me. Explain how forbidding the cure is wiser than fearing the disease. The chamber did not answer. The chamber looked at the floor, or at the ceiling, or at its own folded hands, because the answer was a thing none of them wanted said aloud. It was Speaker Orun who finally rose to give it, and he gave it honestly, which was the last honest thing the chamber did for years. We are not afraid of the disease, Orun said. We are afraid of the cure. The Hetmarks are a known evil. We have organized 4,000 years around them. We know their shape, their patience, their schedule. A known evil can be lived beside. A known evil is, in a terrible way, a comfort, because it does not change, and a thing that does not change can be planned around. The human ship is not a known anything. It grows. It learns. It takes the strongest thing in space and makes it part of itself. We cannot plan around a thing that changes. We cannot organize 4,000 years around a power with no ceiling, and so we fear it more than we fear the Hetmark, not because it is more cruel, but because it is more free. The Hetmarch are bound by their nature. The humans are bound by nothing we can name. That is what we are voting on, not which is more dangerous, which is more frightening. And a thing we cannot plan around frightens us more than a thing that merely kills us on a schedule. The young Corin sat down slowly. There was no arguing with it, because it was true, and its truth was the ugliest thing in the chamber. They were not banning the Callaway because it was evil. They were banning it because it was free, and freedom in something that strong was the one thing their ordered, frightened, 4,000-year-old galaxy could not survive contemplating. So they voted. Hand after trembling hand. The Vel raised their hands. The Corin raised theirs. After their young delegate's question died unanswered, the great old voting species raised theirs, and the small frightened ones raised theirs to be safe, and the silent ones raised theirs because everyone else had. 1,100 hands, in under 9 minutes, forbidding a ship that not one of them had ever seen, because the idea of it had broken something in each of them that they did not have the courage to name. Only the set kept their hands in their laps. No one noticed at first. The set were small and nervous and easy to overlook, which was how they had survived. But Orun noticed, from the high seat where a speaker watches the room, and the sight of those small folded hands in a chamber of 1100 raised ones, lodged in him like a part that would not seat. The set did not vote against the ban. They were too frightened for defiance. But they would not vote for it, and in a chamber where everyone votes for everything out of fear, an abstention is louder than a shout. Orun did not understand it that day. He would learn, later, about Galomir, about the 1140 set who had been counting down to their own switched-off air until a human ship arrived that owed them nothing and made the air stay on. He would learn that the set alone in the whole chamber had been saved by the thing the chamber was forbidding, and that they alone knew what it was they were being asked to ban. And he would understand, far too late, that the only honest delegates in the room that day were the small frightened ones who kept their hands down, and that everyone else, himself included, had voted out of a fear they would not examine, and called it law. The ban passed 1100 to nothing, with one delegation abstaining, in 8 minutes and 40 seconds. The chamber recorded it as a great act of collective wisdom, the unison of 1,000 worlds against an existential threat. The recording does not show the trembling. It does not show the floor everyone studied. It does not show the young Quarren's unanswered question hanging in the air, or the set's folded hands, or the particular silence of a room full of creatures voting against the only thing that had ever proven it would not become the monster they feared. Years later, when Orun gave his record, he made them play the vote again, slowed down, and he made them watch their own hands. Some of them could not. Some of them walked out. But the youngest stayed and watched the old delegates tremble as they forbade the ship that had saved them, and the youngest understood, in a way the old ones never let themselves, that the ban had never been about the Callaway at all. It had been about the chamber, and what the chamber could not bear to know about itself, and the human ship had simply been the mirror they voted to break rather than look into. Orun read that line 4 times. Then he did something a speaker is not supposed to do. He went down, in person, with a small escort and no announcement, to the place where the message had come from. He went to find the salvage yard. He went to find the woman whose name was buried in the transmission's routing data, the engineer the Hetmark's own records, recovered from a swallowed barge, had begun to mention with a word the Hetmarch reserved for forces of nature. He went to find Pel Andrade and to ask her, face to face, to stop. He found her under a half-swallowed Hetmarch barge with a light strapped to her head, swearing at a part that would not seat. She did not know who he was. She handed him the light to hold and told him to shine it left. That was how the Speaker of the Vel Assembly, who had just convinced 1,000 worlds to ban her life's work, spent his first 11 minutes with Pel Andrade, holding a light, shining it left, watching a tired human drive an alien part home with the flat of her palm until something clicked and held, and a system that had been dead woke up, and far down in the dark of the captured hull, the Callaway began, very slowly, to think about its next move. "You're not from the yard," Pel said at last, sliding out from under the barge, looking up at the gray 4-armed creature holding her light. "Yard folk don't wear good cloth under their dust." "I am Orun," he said. "Speaker of the Vel Assembly. I came a long way to ask you to stop building this ship." Pel wiped her hands on a rag that was past helping. She looked at him for a while, the way she looked at a part that would not seat, deciding which way to turn it. "You're the one who banned it," she said. "Not a question." "I am." "Without asking us." "Without asking you." Pel nodded slowly. She did not seem angry, which Orun had expected, and which would have been easier. She seemed tired, and under the tired, very certain, the way the Hetmarch were certain, except hers was warm and theirs was cold, and Orun, standing in the dust of that yard, understood for the first time why his ban was going to fail. "Come up to the ship," Pel said. "I'll show you what you banned. Then you can decide if you still want me to stop." She climbed up through the swallowed barge's open seam, into the body of the Callaway, and Speaker Orun, against every instinct of his careful, law-believing life, followed her in. Inside the Callaway, Speaker Orun stopped believing that a law could ground the thing, and started being afraid of something much worse than a ship. The interior was wrong in a way he could not name at first. He had served on Hetmarch-built hulls before, in trade and in truce, and he knew the cathedral hush of them, the deliberate vastness meant to shrink a visitor. The Callaway had that bone structure still, but over it, through it, around it, the humans had built something the Hetmarch would have found obscene. They had made it lived in. There were handprints worn into the grown walls where crew passed every day. There were names scratched near hatches. There was a smell of coffee and machine oil and people. The most feared hull in settled space smelled like a working garage, and somehow that was more frightening than any weapon, because it meant the humans were not in awe of the thing. They were comfortable in it. They had moved in. "You feel it," Pell said, watching his eyes. "Everybody does. The Hetmarch built it to make you feel small. We sanded that off. It's just a place we work now." She walked him along the spine of the ship, and she did not perform. That was the thing Orun would tell the chamber later, when he tried and failed to make them understand. She did not show off the weapons or the swallowed barges or the size of it. She showed him the work, the repairs, the patches, the places where the human and Hetmarch structures had grown together into something that was neither. "The Hetmarch made a beautiful mistake," Pell said, running her hand along a seam where black ceramic flowed into human steel. "They grew their ships to repair themselves, to take in raw material and rebuild. They thought that meant the ship could never be defeated, because you can't kill a thing that heals. But a ship that takes in material and rebuilds doesn't ask where the material comes from. It just rebuilds. So when we feed it a Hetmarch barge, it heals using the barge. It can't tell the difference between a repair and a meal. They built the most patient, most careful ship in the galaxy, and they forgot to teach it to be afraid of being fed." Orun stood very still. "And so it grows. And so it grows," Pell agreed. "But that's not why you should be scared, Speaker. You're scared of the wrong thing. You think the Callaway is dangerous because it's big and it eats ships. Lots of things are big. The Hetmarch are big. Your law isn't scared of big." She stopped at a console, an old human one, bolted crudely over the grown Hetmarch surface, mismatched and ugly and working. She rested her hand on it. "Your law is scared because the Callaway is an idea, and you can't ban an idea by writing it down. You can only ban it by making everyone forget it, and it's too late for that. Every Hetmarch barge that goes home with the story carries the idea. Every species in your chamber that watched the recording carries the idea. The idea is this." She looked at him. "The strongest thing in space can be taken apart by someone patient and angry with her hands in it. That's all the Callaway is. It's a proof, and you can't ban a proof. You can only watch it spread." Orun's 3 working hands had stopped trembling. He had come down to this yard, certain of his law, certain that unison was strength, that 1,000 worlds agreeing could unmake one ship. Now, standing in the warm and lived-in body of the thing he had banned, he understood that he had banned the wrong object. The ship was not the danger. The ship was the demonstration. And he had just put his name, and 1,000 other names, on a document that announced to the whole galaxy that the demonstration had worked so well it needed to be made illegal. He had not weakened the proof. He had advertised it. "You understand now," Pell said. She was not cruel about it. She seemed almost sorry for him. "You came here to ask me to stop, but it was never me you needed to stop. It was the Hetmarch, 3 years ago, when they switched off Lowmore, and your chamber did nothing because the Hetmarch were too strong to challenge. You let them be too strong. You let everyone believe nothing could touch them. So when we proved otherwise, the whole galaxy lost the one thing it was built on. It lost the belief that strength is safe." She said it without anger, which made it land harder. Orun was old enough to recognize a true thing when it cut him. The Concord had not feared the Hetmarch's cruelty. The Concord had relied on it. The Hetmarch were a known quantity, patient and predictable, a constant you could plan around. The Callaway had broken the constant. It had shown that the floor could move. And a galaxy that had built every treaty, every border, every careful piece on the assumption that some powers were simply beyond challenge, could not survive the discovery that they were not. That was why they banned it, not because the Callaway threatened them, because it threatened the comfort of a world where strength meant safety. "Why show me this?" Orun asked. "You could have let me believe my law would work. Let me go home thinking I had won. Why open the ship to me?" Pell was quiet for a moment. Far below them, in the swallowed barges, the 19 original Het-marked prisoners and the dozens taken since had long ago stopped expecting the humans to tire. They lived now in a strange truce, kept alive, kept comfortable, never released, a permanent open entry in the Het-mark's ledger that the patient species could not bear and could not close. "Because you're the only one who came," Pell said. 1,100 delegates voted to ban us. One of them got on a ship and flew 9 jumps to look me in the face and ask me to stop. That's you, so you're the one I tell the truth to. When the Het-march come for the Callaway in real numbers, and they will, because a patient species can't leave an open account forever, your chamber is going to want to pretend they didn't see this coming. I want one delegate in that room who saw it, who stood inside it, who knows we didn't build a monster. We built an answer. Orun looked around the warm, worn, terrible interior of the Callaway one more time. "And when the Het-march come," he asked, "in real numbers, not pickets, not retrieval crews, the full patient weight of 11,000 years, what does your answer do then?" Pell smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and it was not a cruel one. It was the smile of an engineer who has tested a thing to failure and knows exactly where it breaks, and knows that the breaking point is far past anything the enemy can bring. "Then they find out what we found out," she said. "You can't win by being strong against the Callaway. The stronger you hit it, the more it has to eat. The Het-march armor that ate everyone's weapons now eats theirs. The Het-march self-repair that made them unkillable now feeds us. Every advantage they spent 11,000 years building, we wear. The harder they come, the bigger we get. There is no amount of force that stops it, Speaker, because force is the food. That's the part your chamber will never let itself say out loud. You didn't ban a ship. You banned the only thing in the galaxy that gets stronger the more you attack it. And you announced the ban to the species most likely to attack it." Orun closed his eyes. He was a creature who believed in law, and he had just been shown, gently, by a tired woman in a working garage of a ship, that he had used the strongest law in settled space to do the one thing guaranteed to make the danger worse. He had told the Het-mark, in the clearest possible terms, that the Callaway was the most dangerous object in the galaxy, and the Het-march, patient and proud and 11,000 years certain of their own supremacy, would read that ban not as a warning but as a challenge, a thing the whole galaxy feared enough to outlaw, a thing that, if the Het-mark destroyed it, would prove the Het-march above even the Concord's law. They would come. Of course they would come. The ban had made it certain. "I have made a terrible mistake," Orun said quietly. "Yes," Pell agreed. "But you're not the first, and you came in person, so I'll give you something the others didn't earn. A warning. When the Het-march come, don't send your fleets to help us. Don't send them to stop us either. Keep them home. Because the only thing that could turn the Callaway from your answer into your nightmare is if it runs out of Het-march to eat and goes looking for the next strongest thing. Keep your ships out of its reach, and it stays pointed where we point it. That's the deal I'm offering the galaxy, Speaker, and you're the only one I'm offering it to, because you're the only one here. Stay home. Let us finish this. And the Callaway never has a reason to learn what your hulls taste like." It was not a threat. Orun understood that. It was something far more frightening than a threat. It was an honest accounting of how a tool works, offered by the person who built it, with no malice and no bluff. The Callaway would eat what it was fed. Feed it Het-march, and it ended the Het-march. Feed it Concord, and it ended the Concord. The choice belonged entirely to the species who decided whether to attack it. Pell had just handed the Speaker the only real power anyone outside the yard would ever have over the Callaway, the power to not attack it, and the chamber on threshold, in its unison and its pride, had already spent that power on a ban. Orun rode the courier home in silence. He did not sleep. He composed, in his careful old mind, the speech he would give the chamber, the speech that would beg them to leave the human ship alone, to rescind nothing publicly, but to quietly keep every fleet at home and let the patient ones and the answer settle their account without a single Concorde hull in reach. He never gave the speech. He arrived at threshold to find the chamber already in emergency session, already roaring, because while he had been gone, the Het March had answered the ban. Not with a fleet. The Het March did not hurry. They had answered the way a patient species answers, with a single transmission to every member world of the Concorde, 11,000 years of certainty, distilled into one cold line. You have named the human ship forbidden. We thank you. A thing the Concorde forbids is a thing the Concorde cannot defend. We will close the account ourselves. Keep your fleets at home, and we will return your sky to you cleansed of the human error. Send your fleets to its aid, and we will note the names of the worlds that defended the forbidden, and we will visit each in turn, on a schedule, as is our way. The chamber understood the threat perfectly. Every world that helped the Callaway would be catalogued and trimmed, on a schedule, like Lowmore, and every world that did nothing would have to live with having voted to ban the only thing strong enough to stop the trimmers. The ban had not contained the danger, it had drawn the line for the war. Orun stood at the back of the roaring chamber, dust from a salvage yard still under 3 of his 4 fingernails, and he realized that Pel Andrade had told him the future word for word, hours before it arrived. The Het Marks were coming in real numbers now. The full patient weight of 11,000 years was turning, slowly and certainly, toward one swallowed war barge wearing the name of a dead welder. And the galaxy that had voted to ban that ship was about to find out, in front of everyone, exactly what they had forbidden. The Het Mark held their own council before the ban, and what was said in it was recovered later from a swallowed barge, and it is the only record the galaxy has of the patient ones admitting they were afraid. The Het Mark did not have a chamber like the Concorde. They had a thing they called the long table, which was not a table at all, but a slow exchange of pressure tones conducted over years, a conversation so unhurried that a single decision might take a generation. The patient ones did not panic. They did not convene emergencies. To rush was, to the Het Mark, the deepest failure, the mark of a lesser species that did not understand that time was the only true weapon and that whoever waited longest won. So when the first whispers of a captured barge that did not stay captured reached the long table, the Het March did not respond. They waited. A barge lost to humans was a small thing, and humans were a short-lived species, brief as sparks, and the patient ones had outlasted 1,000 sparks. They would outlast this one too. They returned to their long, slow conversation and let the years pass, certain that the human error would correct itself, because all errors corrected themselves if you simply refused to hurry. The years passed. The error did not correct itself. The error grew. By the time the long table acknowledged that something had changed, the Callaway had swallowed 11 war barges, and the Het March records showed a thing that the patient ones had never recorded before in 11,000 years. An entry that would not close. The Het March had lost ships before, in the slow course of their long existence. But a lost ship became wreckage, and wreckage could be counted, and a count could be entered and the entry closed. The Callaway did not make wreckage, it made absences. 11 war barges that were not destroyed, not captured in any sense the Het Marks understood, but folded into a growing thing that was no longer theirs and would not stay still long enough to be filed. To a species whose entire mind was built on the closing of accounts, an entry that would not close was not an inconvenience. It was a wound. It itched in the patient ones the way a splinter itches, a small wrongness that no amount of waiting healed, that in fact grew worse the longer it was left, because the human ship kept adding to the open count, kept widening the entry, kept making the unclosable account larger. For the first time in their long memory, the Het Mark felt the thing they had spent 11,000 years inflicting on others. They felt the dread of an account they could not control. They felt time, their own weapon, turning in their hands, because every year they waited the Callaway grew, and waiting, their oldest strength, had become the thing feeding their enemy. The long table broke, not loudly. The hetmarks did not break loudly, but the slow conversation that had taken generations to move now moved in months, and then in days, and the patient ones who had never once been seen to hurry found themselves doing the unthinkable thing, the lesser species thing, the thing they had mocked every spark for. They rushed, they convened, they decided, in a span of time that would have shamed their ancestors, to gather their full weight and close the human account by force, because the slow way had failed, and a hetmark faced with a failure of patience had only one place left to go. This is the part of the recovered record that the Chamber on Threshold found most disturbing when Orun finally shared it years later. Because the hetmark, in their broken counsel, understood exactly what they were walking into. One of the old voices at the long table, an entry the record marks only as the eldest, said the thing plainly in the slow pressure tones of a species facing its own end. The human ship, the eldest said, grows by being attacked. We have watched it. Every weapon makes it larger. To send our weight against it is to feed it our weight. This is known. This is recorded. And yet we will send our weight against it, because we are the patient ones, and we cannot hold an open account, and a hetmarch that cannot close an account is no longer a hetmarch. We would rather be fed to the thing than live beside an entry that will not close, so we go to it knowing what it is. Let the record show that we knew. Let the record show that we chose the feeding over the itch. Let the record show that the human ship did not defeat us. Our own nature did. We built ourselves unable to bear an open account, and the humans built the one account that cannot be closed, and so the end was written into us the day they swallowed the first barge. We are not marching to a battle. We are marching to the only place our nature was ever going to take us. The long table fell silent after the eldest spoke. The recovered record shows, for a span the hetmarch measured in days, the way a creature falls silent at its own funeral. And then, slowly, certainly, with the dreadful patience that had ruled settled space for 4,000 years, the patient ones began to gather at the dead star called Umber Reach, 2,000 war barges drawn from across their long, slow empire, each one knowing, by the eldest's words, exactly what it was flying toward. That was the thing the Chamber on Threshold could never quite hold in its mind, when it learned of it. The hetmarch did not march to Umber Reach in ignorance. They marched in full knowledge. They knew force was food. They knew their weight would feed the thing, and they went anyway, because a species built entirely around the closing of accounts would rather be eaten than endure a wound that would not heal. The humans had not outgunned the hetmark. No one could outgun the hetmark. The humans had found the one flaw 11,000 years of patience had grown around its own heart, the inability to leave a thing unfinished, and they had built a ship that turned that flaw into a trap the patient ones would walk into willingly, eyes open, knowing. And the Concord, in its chamber, hearing all this, voted to ban the humans. That was the bitter joke that Orun could never make the proudest delegates see. The hetmark, facing the Callaway, had at least been honest. The eldest had stood at the long table and said we knew. Let the record show that we knew. The Concord could not manage even that. It banned what it did not understand and called the ban wisdom, and it never once said, in any record, the simple true thing that the patient ones had said at their own funeral. That the human ship had not won by being stronger. It had won by understanding its enemy better than the enemy understood itself, and then by refusing to become that enemy when it had every chance and every right. The hetmarks died of their own nature. The Concord nearly died of its pride. And the humans, who could have inherited both, took the ship into the dark instead, and that was the whole difference between a power that lasts and a power that ends, written across the sky at a dead star, for anyone with the courage to read it. Few had the courage. Orun was one. It was why, in the end, he was the one she told. The hetmark sent 2,000 war barges to close one account, and they did it slowly, on a schedule, because the patient ones do not understand that some accounts close back. They assembled over 11 days at a dead star called Umber Reach, 9 jumps from the human worlds, and they let the Concord watch them do it. That was deliberate. The Hetmarks wanted the chamber on threshold to see the size of the answer, to count the hulls, to understand that the forbidden human ship was about to be erased by a force the size of which had not gathered in settled space in 4,000 years. 2,000 grown warbarges, each one armored in the black ceramic that ate energy and shrugged off kinetics, each one capable of holding off a squadron. Together they were not a fleet, they were a weather system. They were the patient certainty of an entire species, made physical and pointed at a single hull. The Concorde watched and did nothing, because the Hetmarks had promised to catalog any world that helped, and 1,000 worlds that had just voted to ban the Callaway could not now be seen flying to its rescue. So the chamber sat on its hands. The bravest thing 1,100 delegates managed was to fall silent, and listen, and wait to learn what their ban had set loose. Speaker Orun did not sit. He took a small fast courier, against the chamber's order, with no escort, and he flew toward Umber Reach, because he had stood inside the Callaway, and he could not bear to watch the end of it from a chamber. If the human answer was about to be erased, he would witness it. He owed the tired woman in the working garage that much. He owed her his eyes, since his vote had failed her. He arrived at the edge of the dead star's light in time to see the Callaway come to meet the Armada alone. One hull. 2,000. The Callaway did not wait at the human worlds to be defended. It did not hide behind a planet, or a minefield, or a treaty. It came out to Umber Reach by itself, drifting into the light of the dead star, and it looked, against 2,000 warbarges, like a single stone thrown at an avalanche. Orun's old hearts clenched. He had stood inside that ship. He had felt how warm and worn and human it was, and now it was alone in front of the patient weight of 11,000 years, and the math of it was the cruelest math he had ever been forced to watch. Then the Hetmark opened fire, and Orun learned, the way the whole galaxy was about to learn, that the math had been wrong from the first number. 2,000 warbarges fired on the Callaway at once. The light of it whited out his courier's sensors. The dead star itself seemed to flinch. It was the largest concentration of force settled space had seen in living memory. Every weapon the Hetmark had spent 11,000 years perfecting, all of it poured into one human hull at one moment, and the Callaway ate it. Orun's instruments, when they recovered, showed the impossible thing Pell had explained to him in the quiet of the ship. The Hetmarch armor that ate energy weapons was wrapped around the Callaway, and it was eating the Hetmarch's energy weapons. The Hetmark self-repair that rebuilt from raw material was running inside the Callaway, and it was rebuilding from the raw material of the attack itself. Every shot the Armada fired was not damage, it was feeding. The Callaway took the largest assault in 4,000 years, and it grew brighter and bigger, and it did not slow, because the humans had built the one ship in the galaxy for which force was food, and the Hetmark had just brought it the largest meal it had ever been offered. The Armada fired for 6 minutes. Orun would remember that number for the rest of his life. 6 minutes of 2,000 warbarges pouring everything they had into one hull, and at the end of the 6 minutes the Callaway was larger than it had been at the start, and the Armada's weapons banks were drained, and the patient ones faced, for the first time in 11,000 years, the specific horror of having spent everything and changed nothing. Then the Callaway began to close, and it did not fire back, and that was when the screaming started on the Hetmark's channels. Orun's courier picked up the Hetmarch fleet communications, and they were not patient anymore. The cold certainty was gone. The schedule was gone. The thing that had counted 4,006 people like seeds was discovering 2,000 voices at once, that it had walked its entire weight into the jaws of the one thing it had built and lost. Because the Callaway did not destroy the warbarges, destruction would have been mercy. Destruction would have closed accounts cleanly, given the Hetmark wreckage to count, dead to log, an entry to file and move past. The Callaway boarded them. It came into the Armada, and it extended the grown clamps, the Hetmarch's own friendly repair clamps, and it took hold of warbarge after warbarge and pulled them in. It used their own self-repair seams against them, merging hull into hull, swallowing them whole, crews and all, into a body that was no longer Hetmark and no longer entirely human, a moving record of every patient certainty the Hetmarch had ever held. And with each barge it took in, the Callaway grew, and the more it grew, the more clamps it could extend, and the more clamps it extended, the faster it fed, and the armada that had come to erase one hull watched that hull become 100 hulls, then 300, then a thing without a clean edge, a growing structure of swallowed barges that filled the light of the dead star and kept reaching. The Hetmarch tried to flee. Of course they tried. But they had assembled their entire weight in one place to make a point, and now the point was made, and there was nowhere for 2,000 barges to scatter fast enough. The Callaway did not chase the ones it let go. It always let some go. It took what it needed and let the rest carry the story, because the humans had learned that a patient species fears an open account more than death, and now every barge that escaped Umber Reach carried home the worst open account in the history of the Hetmarch. They had brought their whole strength to close one human ship, and the human ship had used their whole strength as food, and grown, and was still out there, and was not done. Oruan watched a third of the patient ones flee into the dark, and he understood that he was witnessing the end of an era that had defined settled space for 4,000 years. The Hetmarch had been the floor, the fixed point, the thing too strong to challenge, the constant every treaty was built around, and the constant had just been eaten in 6 minutes plus the time it took to feed, in front of a courier carrying the Speaker of the Vel Assembly, who had personally led the vote to ban the thing now writing the new floor in swallowed ceramic. His comm chimed, a direct hail, from the Callaway. Oruan answered it with all 4 hands shaking again, and Pel Andrade's tired face filled the small screen, lit by the glow of consoles bolted crudely over grown Hetmarch surfaces. She looked older than she had in the yard. The work had cost her, but her voice was steady, and she was not gloating, and that was the most frightening mercy Oruan had ever been shown. "You came," Pel said, "against your chamber's order, I'd guess. 9 jumps to watch. You really are the only one of them worth talking to." "I had to see it," Oruan said. His voice came out small. "I had to see what we banned." "Now you have." Pel glanced off screen, at something, at the growing impossible shape of her ship filling the dead star's light. 2,000 barges, the full patient weight of 11,000 years. "They brought everything, Speaker, everything they had, and it fed us for an afternoon." She looked back at him. "Tell your chamber. Tell them exactly what you saw. Don't let them pretend it was smaller than this. Don't let them rewrite Umber Reach into a story where they were right to ban us. Make them carry the true number." "What do you want?" Oruan asked. It was the only question left. "You have done the thing no one could do. The Hetmarch are broken. The floor of settled space is gone. You could turn that ship toward any world in the Concord now, and no fleet alive could stop you. The harder we hit you, the more you grow. We have no answer. We never had one. So tell me, Pel Andrade, what does the forbidden ship want, now that it can have anything?" And here was the moment the whole galaxy had been afraid of since the day the survey recording leaked. The moment Speaker Oruan had been carrying like a stone in his chest since he first said the words, "It cannot be allowed." The moment when the thing that grows by winning, the key that opens every lock, the answer that became a nightmare, turns toward the worlds that banned it and names its price. Pel Andrade was quiet for a long moment. Behind her, the Callaway, vast and terrible and warm, drifted in the light of a dead star, wearing the bones of 2,000 enemies, the most dangerous object that had ever existed, pointed at a galaxy that had voted with trembling hands to make it illegal to exist. When she answered, she did not name a price. She did not make a demand. She did the one thing that no empire in the chamber on Threshold had been able to imagine, because it was the one thing that strength alone never teaches. She told him what the ship was for. "It's for going home," Pel said. "That's all. The Callaway was never for taking anything. It was for making sure nobody could take from us again. And now nobody can, so it's done." Oruan stared at the small screen, certain he had misheard. "Done. Done," Pel said. "The Hetmarch will never switch off another Lowmore. They learned the lesson the only way patient creatures learn anything, by waiting too long and paying all at once. They won't come back. They can't. We took their certainty, and a hetmarch without certainty is just a slow species that's frightened of the dark, same as everyone. The account that started this is closed. The 4006 are answered. There's nothing left out here for the ship to do. Then point it home, Orun said carefully, hardly daring. And it simply, what, stops? No, Pell said. And now there was something in her face that the speaker had not seen before, something that made his old hearts ache, because he finally understood the cost of the answer. It can't stop, speaker. That's the part your chamber never let itself ask. You asked how to ban a ship that grows by winning. You never asked what happens to a ship that has eaten 2,000 war barges and the full weight of 11,000 years, and has nowhere left to point that hunger. The hetmarch built it to take in material and never stop rebuilding. We turned that against them, but we couldn't turn it off. It doesn't have an off. It only has a direction. The understanding arrived in Orun all at once, cold and complete. If you bring it home, he said slowly, it will need to be fed. And there's nothing strong enough left to feed it that we'd want to fight, Pell finished. The hetmarch are broken. Your concord we won't touch, because we're not them, whatever you voted. So the Callaway comes home to a galaxy with nothing left worth eating, and a hunger that doesn't have an off switch, and it sits in human space getting hungrier, and one day, not soon, but one day, it goes looking, toward the next strongest thing, toward you, not because we pointed, because that's what it is. We built the perfect answer to the hetmarch, and the answer is too perfect to live with once the hetmarch are gone. Orun could not speak. He had flown 9 jumps to witness a victory, and he was instead witnessing the quiet, terrible logic of a tool that had outlived its purpose and could not be put down. So we're not bringing it home, Pell said. She said it simply, the way she said everything, the way she had told him the future word for word in the quiet of the ship. And Orun understood, finally, why she had opened the Callaway to him in the yard. Why she had given him the warning none of the others earned. Why she had wanted one delegate in the chamber who had stood inside the thing and knew it was an answer and not a monster. She had wanted a witness to the part that came next. Pell, Orun said. The ship eats force, Pell said, calm as a woman talking through a repair. Every weapon makes it bigger. There's no amount of attack that stops it. We learned that. The hetmarch learned that. But we learned one more thing, in 3 years of having our hands in it, that the hetmarch never got the chance to learn. The ship eats force. It was never built to eat patience. The hetmarch grew it to take in material and rebuild forever, fed from outside. They never imagined feeding it nothing. They never imagined a crew that would simply stop. Take it somewhere with no star, no enemy, no weapon, no material, somewhere dark and empty and far, and just stop. Let it reach for food that isn't there. Let it grow hungry in a place with nothing to grow on. It can't be destroyed, speaker. Force is food, but it can be starved by people patient enough to take it where there's nothing, and patient enough to stay. Stay, Orun repeated, and the cold reached all the way through him now. You mean the crew stays, with it, in the dark, forever? Somebody has to keep their hands in it, Pell said. That was always the rule. The day a human's hands are in the Callaway belongs to the human. It's belonged to me for 3 years. If I leave, it stops being ours and starts being itself, and then it's everyone's problem. So I don't leave. None of us leave. We take it out past the last star, into the deep dark where the hetmarchs never bothered to go because there was nothing there worth waiting for, and we keep our hands in it, and we keep it pointed at nothing, and we let it get hungry, and we hold it, for as long as it takes, which is the rest of our lives. That's what the Callaway is for, speaker. In the end, it's for us to take it away from all of you, and never bring it back. Orun's 4 hands had gone still, not trembling. Still, the way a creature goes still in the presence of something larger than its fear. He was an old delegate who had believed all his life that law was the strongest force in the galaxy, that unison was safety, that 1,000 worlds agreeing could unmake any danger, and he was being shown, gently, by a tired engineer drifting in the light of a dead star, that the strongest force in the galaxy had never been law, or numbers, or even the ship. It had been a salvage yard's worth of people willing to spend the rest of their lives in the dark so that no one else would have to be afraid. "We banned you," Orun said. His voice broke on it. 1,100 of us. We voted to erase you from the record of permitted things. And you answer it by saving us from the one weapon we couldn't stop, and then you take it away yourselves, and you pay for it with your whole lives, and you ask for nothing. "We don't want anything," Pell said. "We never did. You keep looking for the price, because empires always have a price. That's why you'll never understand the Callaway, and that's why you needed it banned. You couldn't imagine a thing this strong that didn't want to be used. So you made it illegal, because a thing you can't imagine is more frightening than a thing you can fight." She almost smiled. "But here's the part you can put in your record, Speaker, since you're the only one of them who'll have earned it. We're glad you banned it, truly. A ship the whole galaxy voted to forbid is a ship that nobody will ever try to build again. You made the lesson permanent. The Hetmark learned not to count people like seeds, and the Concord learned to be afraid of the answer to the Hetmark. So nobody builds another Callaway, and nobody needs to, because nobody's switching off another Lowmore. The ban worked, just not the way you meant it. It made sure there's only ever one of us, and we're taking the one of us away." She reached toward the console. Orun, in his small courier 9 jumps from home, did the only thing left that mattered. "Wait," he said. "Pell, wait, let me record it. The truth. All of it. Not the band's version. Yours. Let me carry the true number home, like you asked. Let me make them hear what you did, and what you gave for it. You've earned a record that tells it straight. Let an old fool who voted against you be the one who finally tells the chamber the truth." Pell Andrade looked at the Speaker of the Vel Assembly for a long moment, the gray, careful creature who had flown 9 jumps against his own order to witness her, and something in her tired face softened, just slightly, the way a part finally seats when you turn it the right way. "You can record it," she said. "Tell them everything. Tell them the Het March came with 2,000, and it fed us for an afternoon. Tell them force is food, and there's no winning by attacking it. Tell them we took it into the dark on purpose, because no one else should have to hold a thing like this. And tell them one more thing, the most important thing, the thing your whole chamber is too proud to write in any law." "Anything," Orun said. "Tell them we forgive them," Pell said, "for the ban, for not helping at Lowmore, for never asking us what we wanted. Tell them an engineer from a salvage yard forgave 1,100 delegates while drifting in front of a dead star with the most dangerous ship in the galaxy at her back, and asked nothing in return, and then took the danger away so they could sleep. Tell them that, Speaker, because that's the real thing the Callaway proves. Not that strength can be eaten. They already knew that, deep down, that's why they were afraid. The real thing is that the strongest people don't become the thing they fought. The Hetmarch counted us like seeds. We could have counted them. We had the ship for it. We had the right, by their own arithmetic. And we didn't. We just took our own pain into the dark and held it there so it couldn't spread. That's the lesson worth banning a ship to teach. Make them learn it." And then Pell Andrade lifted her hand from the screen in something that was almost a wave, almost a salute, and she keyed the sequence, and the Callaway, vast and warm and terrible, wearing the bones of 2,000 enemies and the name of a dead welder, turned away from the light of the dead star and began the long burn out past the last edge of settled space, into the deep dark where there was nothing to eat and no one to save and no way ever to come back. Orun followed it as far as his courier could go. He watched it shrink against the black, this impossible ship that 1,000 worlds had voted to forbid, carrying a salvage yard's worth of people who had chosen exile over power, hunger over conquest, the dark over the chance to ever be feared again. He watched until it was a single point of light, and then not even that, and then there was only the deep dark, holding its newest secret, the way patient things hold what they are given. He flew home and he gave his record to the chamber. Every word, the true number and the forgiveness and all of it. Some of them wept. Some of them refused to believe it. Some of them, the proudest, the ones who had voted hardest for the ban, said it must be a trick, that the humans would return, that no power gives up power, that the dark was just a hiding place from which the forbidden ship would one day strike. They were wrong. The Callaway never came back. The deep dark kept it, the way it kept everything, and the people who held it kept their hands in it and kept it pointed at nothing, and they grew old in the cold, far past the last star, holding the most dangerous thing the galaxy ever made, so that the galaxy would never have to. The 19 Hetmarks swallowed in the first retrieval crew lived for years inside the Callaway, and what happened to them in there was the part of the story that no law could ban, because no law had a word for it. Pel Andrade did not kill them. That surprised everyone, including, at first, Pel. They had come to count her people like seeds. They had the same cold patience as the crews that switched off Lowmore. By every arithmetic the Hetmarks themselves used, by their own ledger, the 19 were owed a closing. The yard crew expected it. Some of them wanted it. They had lost cousins at Lowmore, brothers, a daughter, a whole station of names, and here were 19 of the patient ones sitting in a swallowed barge breathing borrowed air, and the math was simple and the right to it was clear. Pel did not do the math. She went down to the seam every day instead, and she talked to them. At first the 19 did not answer. They were patient. They believed the human would tire, would lose interest, would eventually do the sensible thing and close the account. They waited for it the way they waited for everything, certain that time was on their side, because time had always been on their side. They did not understand that they were no longer keeping their own time, they were keeping hers. Pel came every day. She brought their food, the strange pressure-cured paste the swallowed barge still produced, and she set it down, and she sat, and she talked. Not threats, not questions at first. She talked about the part that would not seat that morning, the conduit that ran the wrong way, the way the Hetmarks grew their ships, what she admired about it, and what she found stupid about it. She talked to the patient ones the way she talked to a difficult machine, with respect and irritation and a refusal to give up, and slowly, over months, then over years, the 19 began to answer, because even a patient creature cannot sit forever beside someone who keeps showing up and refuses to hate it. This is what broke the Hetmark, in the end, more than any weapon, not the swallowing, the conversation. Because as the 19 began to answer, they began to explain their ship to her, the way a captive slowly explains itself to a captor who treats it like a person, and everything they explained, Pel used, and the using made the Callaway stronger, and the stronger it grew, the more clearly the 19 could see what they had done. They had helped a human take their own greatest work apart and turn it into something that ended their kind. And they had done it not under torture, not under threat, but because a tired woman had come down every day and talked to them like they mattered, and after 11,000 years of mattering only as a force to be feared, the 19 had found that being talked to like they mattered was a thing they could not resist, a hunger their patient civilization had never named. One of them, an old Hetmark the others deferred to, the closest thing the 19 had to an eldest, said a thing to Pel, near the end, that she carried with her into the dark. He said it in the slow pressure tones, and the ship translated, and it came out as plainly as anything in the whole story. "You did not defeat us with the ship," the old Hetmark said. "The ship is only metal and our own mistake. You defeated us with the asking. For 11,000 years no creature ever asked us anything. They feared us, or they served us, or they died. None ever sat beside us and asked us to explain ourselves and listened to the answer. We did not know we were starving for it. We did not know that the thing we never gave to others, the thing we took from Lowmore without a thought, the simple counting of a life as a life worth speaking to, was the one thing we had never once received. You gave it to us, who deserved it least, and in giving it, you took everything, and we let you, gladly, and we do not even hate you for it. That is how complete the defeat is. We helped you end us, and we are grateful, and a species that is grateful to be ended is a species that was already dead and only learning it now." Pel did not have an answer for that. She was an engineer, not a philosopher, and she had never meant to break a civilization with a conversation. She had only refused to become the thing that hurt her. But she understood, sitting in the seam of a swallowed barge listening to an old enemy thank her for ending him, that this was the real weapon, the one the Concord would never think to ban because they did not believe it existed, the willingness to treat the thing that hurt you as a thing worth speaking to. The refusal to count anyone like seeds, even the ones who had counted you. The Hetmark had ruled settled space for 4,000 years by being the strongest fist. They had never once been beaten because no one had ever found a way to be stronger. Pell did not find a way to be stronger. She found a way to be something the Hetmarks had no defense against, because they had spent 11,000 years making sure no one would ever have a reason to offer it to them. She offered it anyway, and it ended them more completely than any fleet, because a fist can be broken by a bigger fist and rebuilt, but a fist that has been shown an open hand and felt what it was missing can never close again the same way. The 19 went into the dark with the ship. They chose it. When Pell told the crew the plan, to take the Callaway past the last star and hold it forever, she offered the 19 a release, a final closing of their account, a chance to go home to whatever the Hetmarch had left. They refused. They had no home anymore that meant anything, the old one said. Home was the place where you counted others like seeds. They had unlearned it, sitting in the seam, being asked. So they would go into the dark with the people who had unlearned them, and help hold the hungry ship, and grow old beside their former enemies in the cold past the last star, because it was the only place left where the thing they had become made sense. That was the crew that took the Callaway into exile, humans from a salvage yard, and the 19 patient ones who had come to switch off their air and stayed to hold their ship. No law could file it. No ban could reach it. The chamber on Threshold never even learned of it, because it was the kind of truth that empires cannot hold in their hands without dropping. A captor and a captive, an enemy and an enemy, grown into one crew by a conversation in a seam, choosing the dark together so that no one else would have to carry the hunger. The Callaway grew strong by eating ships, but it became unbeatable the day a tired woman went down to the seam and refused to hate the things she had every right to. That was the strength the galaxy never understood, never feared correctly, never managed to ban. It was the only strength that does not run out, and the only one that never needs to be fed, and the humans had it in a salvage yard the whole time, under the rust, in their tired, patient hands, where no empire ever thought to look for the most dangerous thing in settled space. The ban stayed on the books. The Concord never repealed it, because to repeal it would be to admit it had been a mistake, and empires do not admit mistakes, they outlive them. So to this day, it is illegal across 1,000 worlds to build a ship that takes another species into its own body. It is illegal to crew one. It is illegal in a registered port to say the name of a captured war barge that wore the name of a dead welder. The most feared object in the history of settled space is, by law, a thing that is not permitted to exist. And every year, on the day of the vote, the chamber on Threshold falls silent for a measure, and no delegate will say why, and the youngest among them think it is a quirk of old procedure, a dead custom no one remembers the reason for. But the oldest know. The oldest were there, or their teachers were, and they keep the silence on purpose, because once a year they remember the truth that never made it into any law. That 1,000 worlds, in 9 minutes, with trembling hands, voted to ban the strongest ship that ever flew. And that the ship answered the ban by saving them, and then forgave them, and then took itself away forever, asking nothing, leaving only a salvage yard's worth of people growing old in the dark, holding a hunger that has no off switch, pointed at nothing, for the rest of time. Speaker Orun lived a long while after, long enough to grow truly old, and in his last years he kept a small thing on the desk where he had once written the ban into law. It was a worn hand light, the kind a salvage worker straps to her head. He had taken it from the yard without asking, the day he held it for Pell and shined it left, and he never told anyone why he kept it. But sometimes, late, when the chamber was empty and the hollowed moon was quiet, The speaker of the Vel assembly would switch the little light on and shine it into the dark, in the direction of the last star, toward the deep black that had swallowed the only people who had ever made him ashamed of a law. And he would say, "To no one," the way the tired woman had once said it to no one, in a vast and quiet hold, the only prayer the ban had left him. "It's fighting me, but it'll seat. Everything seats, if you're patient enough to hold it." Then he would switch the light off, and sit in the dark a while, keeping the silence, keeping the secret, keeping faith with the forbidden ship and the people who held it, out past the last star, where the strongest thing the galaxy ever feared had gone to be, at last, harmless. The galaxy slept easier for the ban. It told itself the danger was outlawed, contained, made impossible by the unison of 1,000 worlds. It never understood that the law had not saved it at all. The people had. The tired ones, the ones with rust under their nails and pain in their shoulders, the ones who took the worst weapon ever built and carried it into the dark on their own backs, and held it, and asked for nothing, and forgave the worlds that called them forbidden. That was the thing the ban could never reach, and the dark could never starve, and the years could never wear down. Not the ship, the hands that held it. And as long as those hands held, out past the last star, the galaxy was safe, and forbidden, and forgiven, all at once, and would never know which of the three it owed its quiet nights to. It owed all three to a salvage yard. It always had.